Hi, good afternoon. This is Meredith Lego, and I'm doing a whole series of videos on the concept of Ascension science. Much of the content that I am using has been channeled from an ascended being called Ascended Master Hilarion. And Ascended Master Hilarion is basically a being who has evolved past the need to reincarnate. And I've been able to tap into him as a way to understand how that occurs. And he's basically working on a mission to help raise the consciousness of humanity, so that we can, essentially evolve and grow as beings of consciousness as well. So the way that I do this is I basically connect with him right after or during meditation. So I'm in a certain sort of frequency state. Usually it's in the theta state. And I essentially can hear him through clear audience and or kind of use automatic writing. So those are the two formats that I'm able to connect with him. And he actually did want to start working with me in order to relay some information around the topics that we've been going through. If you're new to the channel, I highly encourage you to start at the very beginning, because what he taught me builds, and it's helpful if you basically go through the content by building your understanding over time. So it's kind of like chapters in a book. Sort of building the content, and each sort of chapter builds upon the last chapter, if you will, in terms of foundational information. So right now we're going to actually start to get into what he taught me about stages of ascension. And this first video, although I asked the question, like, tell me about the stages of ascension, he doesn't actually get into it, but he did a little bit of a setup. So I'm going to talk about that setup, and then in the next few videos go into that. And then after that, honestly, start to get into concept of how it is that we start to achieve that. So what are the stages, and then how do we work to start to achieve that? So the question that I asked him in this particular channeling session was, Hilarion, what are the paths, steps, stages, or levels to ascension? His answer is, ascension is a process that has been around and in existence since inception. It is the soul's process of integrating with Source over time through learnings and challenges to purify the four bodies towards the highest state of energetic vibration. And the four bodies, if you haven't seen some of the previous videos, are the physical, emotional, mental, and etheric bodies. I happen to understand through him that there's other bodies that we go through, and at some future point we'll get into the concept of the light body. But that's essentially it. He goes on to say that this continues into the energies or light bodies. Oh, he did say it. So this continues into the energies or light body, which must continue to be refined in the vibrational level. Source, or God, if you wish to call it that, source energy is very intense, and returning to source is not possible without reaching that state. It will destroy the energy being otherwise. The journey is individual to the being based upon his/her own ability to absorb the lessons and the light. So that's pretty interesting. So essentially, once we kind of move past what we understand to be physical matter, we start to move into different body forms. And I'm going to actually share some interesting concepts that he talked to me about how that happens within the cellular structure. But we can't necessarily jump all the way, let's say, up many, many dimensions and densities. I guess it would be more density format if you kind of go through the last videos that I've been sharing on the concept of dimension versus density. But it's difficult for us to jump up many densities and connect directly to source, although technically we are source. But getting to that highest level would be too much and basically destroy the cellular structure bodies that we exist in today, that our consciousness exists in today. And when I say that we're all source, essentially, we're all source that has basically fractalized and is manifesting different experiences. And he talks about this a little bit. So it's source beginning to better understand itself. So he goes on to say that the vibration of love, or that we associate with love, is the highest state, as it is the state which eliminates all entropy. It is a state of oneness. The energy feeds and produces simultaneously. And I think that's really key. The energy both feeds and produces simultaneously. So as you actually start to evolve up the energy consciousness ladder, you might, as consciousness, actually start to become a star, or basically a black and white hole, if you will, which oddly enough, the other side of a black hole is a white hole or a star. So you're both using and generating energy simultaneously. Eventually, I think humanity, or we as beings, get there. We're not at that state because we still have to consume energy in the form of food. Although I understand that some humans are able to move past that and are able to use more energy sources of the sun. So again, the vibration of love is the highest state, as it is the state which eliminates all entropy. It is a state of oneness. The energy feeds and produces simultaneously. It is a self-sustaining life force. This is why beings move to source for life-sustaining energy that is pure and lower in entropy. The lessons and the challenges diminish over time, but every chela, who is nothing more than like a spiritual student, so every chela walking the path must go through the intention to work the energy body into a higher vibrational state. The consciousness already knows what must be achieved and what the path is. The work is for integration of these four lower bodies into the higher consciousness in the early phases. So essentially we have lower consciousness and higher consciousness. And sometimes I reference in past videos the idea of the higher self. And that's essentially it. It's starting to integrate the lower bodies and the lower consciousness and the consciousness associated with the four lower bodies into the higher consciousness. These are setting up the density phases or levels. The higher densities have worked past integration of the four lower bodies and are consciously moving into a collective consciousness. Beings at higher densities have integrated all aspects of themselves and their energy. They see the external as energy, vibrating at different rates as expressed through color and sound. These beings are at a point of turning their attention to help others make the journey in lower densities, for they have a higher compassion and love for all energy, all source, and the various manifestation it assumes or takes. The way to ascension is not always easy, and the time is dependent on the individual beings. Lessons are meant to help the being experience through multiple perspectives and archetypes. The experiences are burned into the cellular DNA of the etheric blueprint. So let me unpack that last paragraph a little bit. So first he said that the way to ascension is not always easy, and the time is dependent upon the individual being. So I want to say a couple things about that. So we currently are in a sort of a source field holographic construct, and we find ourselves on what we understand to be the planet Earth. Earth itself is a sentient being that has consciousness, and Earth is actually in the process of raising her vibrational frequency as well. And what's causing this is within kind of the source holographic construct. Our placement in the solar system, in the Milky Way, is essentially rotating to a certain place around the galactic center. which is called the galactic sun, which actually exists in a higher density, so we don't necessarily see it, but it's essentially emanating off energy. And about every 26,000 years, our placement in the solar system sort of rotates one pass around. And from this galactic center, a certain frequency is being generated off in certain directions. And so we actually have the opportunity to sort of experience that at a couple of points, 26,000 years, and then at about, call it 11 to 12,000 years or so. And these rays, which I kind of expressed in a last series of videos, are just emanating a higher frequency that has an impact on consciousness that's sort of experiencing the energy that it's going through. So the Earth is experiencing this higher energy, and it gets translated from kind of the galactic center to our local star, which then sends these rays to Earth. And we are all getting hit with these higher gamma rays as well as the Earth. So she is starting to raise her vibrational frequency to, just higher hertz. That's causing us to also increase our vibrational frequency. So to a certain extent, we're sort of all going through it together as sort of a species, if you will. Humanity as a species, and all life on Earth as a set of species, if you will. But each soul, each being, is having an incarnational experience within a human body, if you will. And that being inside the human body has free will choice of how it's going to listen to the subtle calling from the higher self about ascending or not. So that's what he says, is that, yes, while we could be going through this as a collective consciousness of humans, as an individual soul, you have a choice about whether you want to ascend or not. And we're actually just in the process of experiencing a pretty serious choice point around that, where we're seeing sort of a bifurcation of different consciousness play out. And eventually it's going to work back to integrate back in, but that's essentially what's happening. And depending upon the choices that individuals make, will put them onto different timelines that they will experience. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but that's essentially what's happening for the individual soul manifestation. So again, the way to ascend is not always easy, and the time is dependent on the individual being. So you can ascend very quickly, you can ascend a lot longer. It sort of depends upon the individual being. Now, as I understand it, whole species will take a certain amount of time, but the individual soul, can have a different experience of time of going through that process. Lessons are meant to help the being experience through multiple perspectives and archetypes. So again, we, as a higher self, our higher self is going to sign up for lessons to experience, to help consciousness learn, help the higher self and help the consciousness learn. So that could be intentional things like entering into a certain family structure, having a certain body type or DNA configuration that could create different experiences throughout the lifetime. It could be coming into a family in a certain geographic location that has sort of different political, sociographic dynamics playing out. But either way, you're going to have certain experiences in that life. And so you kind of sign up for those experiences, but simultaneously you're manifesting experiences based upon your vibrational frequency. And I encourage you to watch the video on mirroring that sets that up. You're also doing this in a world that has very polarized set of frequencies, hot and cold, light and dark, just different frequencies for you to make free will choices. So the lessons that we experience are meant to help us navigate all these energies so that we can get multiple perspectives as we're evolving. The experiences are then burned or sort of cataloged, if you will, within the cellular DNA of the etheric blueprint, which is almost, it's another body that we have, but it's essentially helping to store, from a memory perspective, what we've gone through and what we've learned through that situation. So he goes on to say that the saying, "you have all you need," when entering an incarnation is quite appropriate, because all incarnational experiences of the being and the collective are stored for future use. This is called the Akashic. Now, I think around this period of time, I was kind of frustrated about the whole concept of incarnating. And I'm like, why do we have to do this? And in fact, I do ask this question. And by the way, why do we have to keep learning the same math lessons and keep learning language as we're growing up? This is ridiculous. Like, why can't we just remember that? Then I came to realize that we can incarnate in other civilizations, other bodies, like whole other species. So, learning English and trying to remember that isn't necessarily helpful if you're incarnating into a whole nother planet. So I get that. That's sort of the beauty in it. But he says that you have all you need, in the sense that you might be learning how to sort of interact with other beings. You might be learning how to operate out of your heart center and how to have empathy. And those are the types of lessons that we tend to retain within our etheric blueprint. So you have all of that based upon your past experiences, but you also have the ability of tapping into sort of the collective set of experiences that are stored within sort of the collective consciousness of multiple beings. Now, we're probably tapping into those beings that are associated with the Earth collective consciousness, but as you start to awaken, you can start to tap into the collective consciousness of other species that sort of exist in our sort of source field holographic construct. And I've started to do that a little bit. It's been kind of interesting. So he goes on to say that all individuals on the path must experience, work through, and clear both individual and historic group traumas. The wheels and the cycles of time bring about similar situations or lessons to help facilitate the clearing process. With each cycle comes another opportunity for a free will choice that lowers entropy. The lessons are manifest from the being both during the planning of the incarnation and during the life experience, based on their attraction of lessons needed through vibration, thought, feeling, actions, and words. This sets up a mirroring effect for the individual to learn through via the hologram. It is very elegant in nature, the whole process is. So I think I tried to explain that a little bit more. And again, I encourage you to watch some of the earlier videos that I did on the source field as well as mirroring, because that essentially explains a little bit more. Now, then I said, wow, thank you. And then I asked, whose idea was it to set up the whole process in the first place? His answer is, you, as source, felt the desire to experience itself. And when that thought manifested, the explosion or seed of the process immediately came into form. So that's pretty interesting. And I don't necessarily know how that correlates to, let's say, the concept of the explosion, I guess, in terms of the formation of the universe. Maybe there's a correlation to it, but that's how he answered it. Next, I asked a question. Sometimes I feel I'm trapped in an ongoing game. There is no way to get out or no ability to get off the ride. Why keep this going? What about the free will of not playing or participating? His answer is, you do have free will. You have the choice of not knowing about any of this. In other words, my higher self felt the need to start waking me up. So I had the choice of not awakening and not understanding all this and sort of being in bliss with that lack of understanding and going through that frustration. So he's saying, okay, so you have the free will choice. You have the choice of not knowing about any of this. The third density was created for that reason. Your higher self has chosen the remembering process consciously in this life. You have also remembered past parallel lives, but now your remembering is during a convergence to assist the planetary awakening and quicken the vibration of humans in support of Gaia during the in-breath. So Gaia is, I guess, another word for Earth at a higher vibrational frequency as we're kind of moving up to another harmonic universe, another whole series of octaves. And when he references the in-breath, he's talking about basically our kind of our placement again around our placement of our solar system, if you will, and its placement around the Milky Way galaxy. The central sun basically goes through a process of an in-breath and an out-breath, and you know that's essentially what we're experiencing now. You agreed to do this service, although you don't remember it right now. So apparently, my higher self signed up to remember in this lifetime, which has been very helpful. I don't think I could ever go back. I could never go back. It's kind of like that movie, The Matrix. You know, once you know that you're in the Matrix, you can't go back to not knowing it. So I, at some point, before coming into incarnation, agreed to remember in this life. And I have to imagine that I agreed to try and share what I'm learning, or have this connection with Hilarion to share what I'm learning, because I felt such an enormous calling to do this. I felt the need, like I was meant to channel. I felt the need to study material. It's been sort of a nonstop drive and passion. So I've followed the lesson or the teaching of just follow your passion where it leads you, and you'll go from there. And in fact, I do consciously have the ability of going out of body, and when I do that, sometimes I go to libraries and study as well, and just a different density. So, so again, we have the free will choice of sort of, we're going to incarnate. When you get to a certain point, you don't have to incarnate as much, but you know, we have the free will choice of knowing or not knowing about that. So then I asked him, I want to remember more about more of the soul agreements I made prior to this incarnation and past incarnation. I want to remember more of my past lives so I can learn from them and clear past traumas or belief systems that no longer serve me. Can you help me with this? And although it's a question for me, I think that the answer is very helpful, because I'm sure some of you, if you're starting to watch this channel, are probably asking the same questions. So he said, you have the ability to do this now. You have to subconsciously remove blocks that have been put in place over time, and more appropriately, that you have put in place over time. I will guide you to remove the blocks yourself. Again, you must do the work for yourself. I will point and prompt you in certain directions, as will your higher self, but you must have the free will to understand the messages or hints and take action. These messages will come in the form of feelings and synchronicities. You must practice and discipline yourself to clear some traumas. You have the desire and will, which is why I agreed to support your rise. And then he basically kind of ends it there. And of course, I thanked him. So what I have learned by exploring some elements of my past lives is that sometimes our through the experiences that we've had, or through the traumas that we might have experienced in some past lives, we actually put blocks in place. So we kind of subconsciously choose to not remember certain things. It would be like, let's say a child has a really, really bad experience growing up and sort of tries to block out the memory of that. So sometimes we do that, and that actually can create for us, oh, I'm getting a download right now. Ooh. That can actually create for us a sequencing of having blocks in place in future lives. And so sometimes if you have certain traumas or triggers to things that are going on in your life, it could be because of something you experienced in some past lives, and that could be the calling for you to do some inner work to explore what that can be. It could be earlier in your life. It could be tied to something from a past life. And ultimately, you do have to do the work in order to sort that out. So he's basically saying that, you know, it's not easy work. You're going to have to come to grips with the dark shadows within yourself. You're going to have to learn how to integrate them, but ultimately that'll help with your vibrational frequency rising. And that through that process, as you're rising the consciousness of your vibrational frequency, as I touched upon the last few videos, that actually starts to impact the density that your consciousness will form within the matter that you experience. So that was his first setup, if you will, when I asked the questions about stages of ascension. So I hope that helps. And if you like the content, and if you're not a member of the channel, I encourage you to subscribe and then sign up for alerts to see when I post some future videos. So in the next video, I'll actually get into the first stage of ascension and start to talk that through and unpack that a bit. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.